An arrogant millionaire gets in trouble when she realizes that her personal driver, whom she despises, knows much more about her past than she ever imagined and is hiding a shocking secret. Stay until the end and see how a single revelation can completely change the way people treat you. Amelia Cooper was the kind of woman who always attracted attention wherever she went. Not just for her impeccable beauty, with her perfectly aligned blonde hair and icy cold eyes, but also for her lofty posture and the way she treated others. She had inherited the family empire after the premature death of her parents, and since then had run the business with an iron fist. Known for being ruthless in business, Amelia demanded perfection in every aspect of her life, especially from those who worked for her. On a cloudy morning, Amelia descended the marble staircase of her imposing mansion, her heels echoing on the gleaming floor. She wore an elegant gray suit that emphasized her authority while reviewing her day's appointments on her phone. As she stepped out of the mansion, Noah, her driver, was already waiting with the car ready in the circular driveway. He was a man of few words, always serious, his short hair neatly trimmed, and his gaze focused. "You're late, Noah," Amelia said in a sharp tone, without even looking directly at him. Her voice carried the usual disdain. In fact, Noah was perfectly on time, as always, but for Amelia, anything less than perfect was reason for criticism. "My apologies, ma'am," Noah responded with his usual calm, opening the back door for her to get in. Amelia ignored the apology and got into the car. She was irritated as usual, and the business meeting she had that morning only worsened her mood. Sitting in the back seat, she began reviewing her company's reports, her mind already processing how she would deal with the partners who were waiting for her. Noah started the car and, as always, remained silent as he drove through the city's luxurious streets. The relationship between Amelia and Noah was cold and distant. To her, Noah was no more than a shadow, someone who existed to serve her needs and who deserved nothing more than the occasional harsh word. It didn't matter to her who he was or what he felt. He was just the driver. As the car moved along the busy avenue, Amelia continued reviewing her papers. The city around her blurred by. Her obligations and ambitions were all that occupied her mind, and the world around her seemed insignificant. Amelia believed that power and control were the only things that mattered. She had earned a prestigious position, and no one was going to take it away from her. Her life motto was clear. Those who weren't strong enough to stand out in the business world simply weren't worthy of her attention. Amelia's arrogance was the result of years spent living under the pressure of the Cooper name, one of the wealthiest and most influential families in the country. From an early age, she had learned that weakness had no place in her life. She had watched her parents build their fortune with determination and sacrifice, and felt it was her duty to continue the legacy. When they died in a tragic car accident, Amelia found herself alone in control of everything. Her feelings of grief were quickly suppressed by the need to show strength and ruthlessness in the market. Noah, on the other hand, was there every day, quietly fulfilling his role. He knew Amelia's world, but never cared to belong to it. Even in the face of constant disdain, he remained calm and professional, never responding in kind. His silence only fueled Amelia's belief that he was irrelevant, a replaceable piece in the large puzzle of her luxurious life. As the car stopped at a red light, Amelia glanced quickly into the rearview mirror and noticed Noah watching the traffic, focused. For a brief moment, she felt a strange curiosity about who he really was. How can someone accept being treated like this every day, she thought. But she quickly brushed the thought aside, finding the idea that the driver had any relevance in her life ridiculous. To her, people were just tools. They either served a purpose or were discarded. A few minutes later, they arrived at the office building where the meeting was to take place. As usual, Noah parked the car perfectly and quickly stepped out to open the door for Amelia. Without a word, she exited the car and walked toward the entrance, not bothering to thank or acknowledge his effort. Noah watched in silence, his expression as impassive as ever. But what Amelia didn't know was that behind that calm exterior, there was much more to Noah than she could ever have imagined. Something that soon would change her life in a way she never expected. After an exhausting day, Amelia was heading back home. The meeting had been long and filled with tension. As usual, she left the office building and found Noah waiting for her with the car already parked in front of the entrance. Without saying a word to the driver, Amelia got into the vehicle and settled into the back seat, removing her high heels with a sigh of relief. She started scrolling through her phone, responding to emails and updating her schedule, as if work never really ended. While the car traveled back to her mansion, Amelia's mind was absorbed by thoughts of the challenges she would face at the company in the coming days. The numbers weren't as promising as she had hoped, and she knew she would have to make some tough decisions to keep the company at the top. Total control over everything and everyone was her defense mechanism. However, that day, something would disrupt her unbreakable focus. When the car finally stopped at the mansion's circular driveway, Noah got out to open the door as usual. Amelia grabbed her bag and swiftly exited the car, climbing the stairs without even glancing at him. Upon entering the grand foyer of her luxurious home, a strange feeling crept over her. It wasn't fatigue or stress, but a slight discomfort, as if something was out of place. Ignoring the sensation, Amelia headed to her bedroom to change clothes. It was only later, when she returned to the car to retrieve a folder of documents she had left on the back seat, that something caught her eye. As she opened the car door and picked up the folder, Amelia noticed a small white envelope, plain, with no return address or markings. It was lying beneath the folder, as if someone had placed it there discreetly. She frowned. Who could have left that? And more importantly, how had no one noticed? Amelia's natural suspicion began to rise. She picked up the envelope and, with hesitation, opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper, carefully folded. The handwriting was fine and elegant, unlike anything Amelia was used to seeing. As she unfolded the paper, her eyes scanned the first few lines, and what she read made her heart race slightly. You are not alone. Things aren't always what they seem. What was taken from you is closer than you think. Amelia reread the message several times, trying to understand its meaning. What was this trying to say? And who could have left the letter? With no sender, no signature, nothing to indicate where it came from, an eerie chill ran down her spine. The idea that someone knew intimate details about her life and might be watching her closely was disturbing. She looked around, as if expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. But the night was quiet. The mansion's lights shone over the vast garden, and there was no sign of movement. Her first instinct was to call security and ask them to check the cameras, but something stopped her. That note. It felt personal, as if it came from someone who knew her intimately. It was an unsettling feeling. Instead of calling anyone, Amelia decided to keep the letter. She brought the envelope to her room, sitting on the edge of her bed as she examined the paper again, hoping that somehow the meaning would become clearer. She forced herself to think about who could be behind it. The only people with direct access to the car were Noah and the mansion's security staff, besides herself. It can't have been Noah, she thought. He never meddles in anything. Besides, he was always extremely professional and reserved, almost like a shadow. Still, the unease remained. Amelia decided to leave the mystery for the next day. Her day had already been long, and the exhausting meeting had taken its toll. She placed the letter in a locked drawer in her desk, feeling strangely vulnerable. It was rare for someone like Amelia, always in control of everything, to feel exposed. But at that moment, there was something making her realize that no matter how much power she held, she wasn't completely safe. The next morning, as she got ready to leave for the office again, the letter continued to linger in her mind. No matter how hard she tried to ignore it, part of her couldn't stop thinking about the cryptic message. What had been taken from her? Are they talking about the company? She wondered. But she quickly dismissed that idea, as the tone of the letter was far too personal. Could it be about her family? But what was there to discover about that? Her family's past had always been shrouded in mystery, especially after the disappearance of her younger brother when she was a child. But that issue had long been buried, or at least that's what she believed. As Amelia descended the stairs toward the car that morning, something inside her had shifted. For the first time, the silence of Noah seemed heavy, and the idea that he could somehow be connected to the letter unsettled her. She couldn't imagine why, but that note had planted a seed of doubt in her mind. On the way to the office, Amelia glanced at Noah through the rearview mirror, as if expecting him to give some sign, but he remained as he always did, quiet, focused on the road, never meeting her gaze. He was so discreet that it seemed impossible he had any involvement, but Amelia couldn't entirely dismiss the idea. In the following days, this doubt grew within her. The letter remained unanswered, and the feeling that something was about to change, or that something was about to be revealed, left her increasingly restless. Every time she got into the car, she couldn't help but feel watched, as if someone was waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. And despite all her arrogance and sense of control, Amelia was beginning to realize that, this time, something was beyond her grasp. The mysterious letter continued to haunt Amelia. In the following days, her mind kept circling around the cryptic message. She could hardly concentrate on her work, which was unusual for someone who was always so focused and determined. There was something about that note that made her feel vulnerable, and it deeply irritated her. Amelia had always prided herself on having everything under control, being untouchable. Now it felt like someone was playing with her, and that sensation put her on high alert. Determined to uncover who was behind the letter, Amelia began investigating quietly. She didn't want to raise any suspicions or alarm anyone, so she opted to act alone, without involving the mansion's security or her assistants. That morning, while Noah was driving her to the office, Amelia decided that her first step would be to review the security footage from the mansion. Once she arrived at her private office, away from the curious eyes of her employees, she accessed the mansion's surveillance system. The cameras covered almost every angle of the property, including the entrance where the car was usually parked. As she reviewed footage from the past few days, she saw that Noah, as always, arrived punctually and didn't appear to be acting suspiciously. He would get out of the car, check the vehicle's details, and quietly wait for Amelia to come down. Even so, something inside her urged her to keep going. A growing discomfort surrounded Noah, although she couldn't quite pinpoint why. Maybe it was because he was so silent, so introspective. Or maybe the letter itself was leading her to distrust everything and everyone around her. Days passed and Amelia continued her investigation, but without much success. There was no solid evidence linking Noah to the letter. Still, her instincts told her he knew more than he was letting on. However, without proof, she couldn't accuse him of anything. Then one rainy afternoon, Amelia decided to revisit a topic that had been buried in her family for years: the disappearance of her brother. The memory was still painful. Amelia had been only 6 years old when her brother Oliver vanished. He had been just a baby, and the circumstances of his disappearance were always shrouded in mystery. Her father, a powerful man at the time, had made sure the disappearance was covered up with extreme discretion. No details had been made public, and the family never spoke openly about it again. Although Amelia had been very young at the time, she still remembered the weeks of desperation her mother endured. The grief that consumed the family had been so immense that over time, the subject became taboo. Whenever Amelia asked about Oliver, her mother would avoid eye contact, and her father would change the subject. Eventually, she stopped asking. Now, however, that old ghost returned to her mind. Could it be possible that the letter was somehow connected to Oliver's disappearance? Something inside her told her this was an important clue. Determined to learn more, Amelia decided to visit the family archives, stored in a restricted room in the mansion. Her parents kept detailed records of all family business, as well as personal and confidential documents. As the heir, Amelia had access to these files, but she had rarely shown interest in their personal contents. This time, however, she was willing to open old wounds in search of answers. That evening, she returned to the mansion and headed straight to the archives, located in the basement of the house. The room was dark and cold, with shelves full of neatly organized folders and documents. Amelia combed through various shelves until she found a locked drawer labeled Personal Affairs. She knew that inside she might find what she was looking for. She unlocked the drawer with a key her father had given her years ago, but had never used. Inside, she found several old folders, including one labeled with Oliver's name. Amelia opened the folder with trembling hands. There were records of her brother's disappearance, police reports, private investigations hired by her father, and personal notes from her mother. As she read through those old documents, a pattern began to emerge. Contrary to what her family had always told her, Oliver's disappearance wasn't just a simple kidnapping. There were more layers to the story. Some of her father's notes suggested that he suspected people within their own family. Amelia was stunned to read one of the observations. I can't trust even those closest to me. The suspicions fall on someone in the family. Nothing is as it seems. Amelia felt the weight of those words. Her own father had suspected that Oliver's kidnapping was orchestrated by someone close. This stirred something deep inside her, bringing back long-buried memories. What shocked her the most was a name that appeared repeatedly in the documents. Richard, an old family friend who had disappeared shortly after Oliver's kidnapping. Her father seemed to believe that Richard was involved, but there hadn't been enough evidence to accuse him officially. Amelia spent the entire night absorbed in the archives. The pieces were beginning to fit together in a disturbing way. She discovered that Richard had a son who had been sent to live abroad shortly after the kidnapping. This detail made her shiver. For some reason, this information sounded familiar. Could it be that Noah, the quiet and enigmatic driver who was always nearby, had some connection to Richard? The idea seemed absurd at first, but something inside Amelia screamed that there was more to this story. She remembered how Noah always avoided talking about his past. Always discreet, always distant. He had started working for the family about 5 years ago, and although he had always been efficient and reliable, Amelia had never known anything about his personal life. Perhaps it was time to investigate further. That same night, Amelia decided she would ask Noah more questions, but in a careful way, without raising suspicions. If he truly had any involvement with Oliver's disappearance or with the letter's insinuations, she needed proof before confronting him. Now the story of her own family was unraveling before her eyes. What she thought she knew about her family's past was revealing itself to be much darker and more treacherous than she had ever imagined. Amelia spent the following days reflecting on what she had discovered. The information she had unearthed from the family archives left her feeling unsettled, especially the mention of Richard's disappearance, and the fact that her father had suspected someone close to the family was involved in Oliver's kidnapping. The name Noah began to carry an unbearable weight in her thoughts. He had entered her life so discreetly, always impeccably efficient, but at the same time, there was something mysterious about him. One morning, Amelia decided that she couldn't postpone the confrontation any longer. She needed to know who Noah really was, if he had any connection to Oliver's disappearance, and above all, what secret he had been hiding. There was something dark looming over her life, and she had to unravel the mystery. The moment came during a drive back home. She chose a longer route, asking Noah to avoid the city's traffic. It was the perfect setting for what Amelia had planned, to confront him away from the curious eyes of the mansion's security or anyone else who might interfere. In the silence of the car, where only the hum of the engine and the soft noise of the road could be heard, Amelia felt her heart beating harder. She looked into the rear-view mirror and saw Noah focused on the road as always. He was a difficult man to read, with his neutral expressions and controlled posture. It was that neutrality that disturbed her. How could he remain so distant and calm, even when Amelia had treated him so harshly? He seemed immune to any provocation. Amelia took a deep breath. She decided to start directly. Noah, I need to talk to you about something important. Her voice came out harsher than she intended, and she saw in the mirror that Noah tensed slightly, though he didn't show it openly. Of course, ma'am. What would you like to discuss? He asked, keeping his eyes on the road. Amelia paused, thinking of how to phrase the question without sounding paranoid or accusatory. But deep down, she knew there was no way to soften it. She had to be direct. You've been working for my family for 5 years, right? She asked, waiting for him to confirm. Yes, ma'am, Noah replied without hesitation. And in all that time, I've never known anything about your personal life. I never asked before, but where did you come from, Noah? Who are you, really? For a brief moment, Noah seemed to hesitate. His fingers tightened slightly on the steering wheel, and his eyes flicked briefly to the rearview mirror, meeting Amelia's gaze. He took a deep breath before responding. I'm just the driver, ma'am. I'm here to do my job. Amelia felt a chill. The answer was predictable, but the way he gave it, so evasive, only reinforced her suspicions. That doesn't answer my question, Amelia insisted, her tone now more firm. Who are you, and why are you here? I'm not just talking about your job. I'm asking about your past. There's something about you, something I need to know. Noah remained silent for a few moments. The car continued moving down the road, the sound of the tires the only noise in the tense atmosphere. Amelia could see that he was thinking about what to say. There was an internal battle happening within him, something she couldn't fully decipher yet. "Why are you asking this now, ma'am?" Noah asked calmly, though his voice carried a slight tension. Amelia hesitated for a moment before continuing. She decided to be honest. "I found a letter that said I'm not alone, that something was taken from me, and it's closer than I think. So I started investigating. I found records about my brother's disappearance, Oliver. And strangely, some things started pointing to you. It doesn't make sense, unless you're hiding something. And I think you are." The silence that followed was suffocating. Amelia could feel she was getting closer to something big, something that could change her life forever. She wasn't sure if she was ready to hear the truth, but at the same time, she knew she needed to hear it. Noah kept his eyes fixed on the road for a few more minutes. Finally, he sighed deeply, as if preparing to reveal a burden he had carried for a long time. "Ms. Amelia, I'm not just your driver," he began, his voice sounding deeper and more emotional than ever. "In fact, I was never an ordinary driver. What I'm about to tell you is something that will change everything. I am Oliver, your brother." Those words hit Amelia like a punch to the gut. She felt the world around her spinning, her mind struggling to process the shocking revelation. "What?" was all she could manage to say, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Yes, I am Oliver Cooper, your brother, who disappeared all those years ago. I survived, but the circumstances in which I grew up were very different from what you might imagine. I was taken far away, and many things happened that prevented me from coming back sooner. But when I grew up, I decided to return and see for myself how life had gone on without me. Working as your driver was the way I found to get close without exposing myself right away." Amelia felt her body stiffen. How could this be Oliver? The brother she believed was dead, gone, lost forever. It was surreal. The man in front of her, the driver with whom she had barely exchanged words, was her missing brother? So much she didn't know, so many questions swirling in her mind. Noah, or rather Oliver, continued talking, now revealing details about his past that Amelia could never have imagined. "I was kidnapped by someone within our family's circle of trust. Richard, a close friend of our father, was behind my disappearance. I was taken out of the country and spent years in different homes, not knowing who I really was. When I finally discovered the truth, it was too late. Coming back seemed impossible, but I chose to do it, and that's why I'm here now." Amelia couldn't believe what she was hearing. She had always thought her brother was dead, and now he was here, right next to her, like a shadow. Her mind struggled to accept the reality. Guilt began to gnaw at her. She had treated him with such contempt and arrogance, never knowing that he was her own blood. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" Amelia asked, her voice choked with emotion. "Why did you hide all this time?" Oliver looked at the rearview mirror, his eyes meeting Amelia's firmly and resolutely. "I needed to see who you had become. I needed to understand what our family had become after I was lost. And honestly, I was afraid of the reaction. I didn't know how you or anyone else would react to the truth." Amelia felt a mix of anger, sadness, and guilt. She wanted to scream, but at the same time, she wanted to embrace him. The brother she had lost was there, right in front of her, and all she had done over the years was treat him like a stranger. The weight of this revelation hit her hard. The car kept moving forward, but for Amelia, it felt like time had stopped. Oliver was back, but nothing would ever be the same again. She knew the truth would change everything between them, and the journey to reconciliation was only just beginning. The revelation that Noah was, in fact Oliver, her long-lost brother, had left Amelia completely stunned. The reality she thought she knew was collapsing before her eyes. Her brother, whom everyone believed to be dead, had been by her side for years, silently watching her life unfold, working for her as a mere driver. Now Amelia had to confront this devastating truth, and even worse, face the harsh consequences of her arrogance and coldness. The days following the revelation were confusing. Amelia didn't know how to act. Her mind was flooded with memories of her childhood and the loss that had marked her family. She recalled how her mother had sunk into a deep depression after Oliver's disappearance, and how her father had hardened, becoming obsessed with work and total control over their lives. Amelia had learned to cope with the pain by shutting herself off emotionally and taking control of the family empire, just as her father had done. But now all those emotional barriers were crumbling. Determined to uncover more about what had really happened to Oliver and to understand how her own family was involved, Amelia knew it was time to confront those responsible, starting with the ones who still remained within the family structure. She needed answers. More than that, she needed redemption, not just for herself, but for her brother as well. Noah, now Oliver, agreed to keep his true identity hidden for the time being. He too was processing everything, and although he had finally revealed who he was, he hesitated over what to do next. As painful as the truth was, he wanted to give Amelia the chance to act with integrity before everything came to light. Amelia knew that confronting her Uncle Patrick would be the first step. Patrick Cooper, her father's brother, had taken over much of the family business after the death of Amelia's parents. He had always been an ambiguous figure, someone who stayed in the background but controlled key parts of the Cooper empire. Patrick was the kind of man who kept secrets, and Amelia suspected that he knew more about Oliver's disappearance than he had ever let on. One evening, Amelia arranged a private dinner with Patrick at her mansion, claiming she wanted to discuss some important details about the company. Patrick, always shrewd and controlling, accepted the invitation. He rarely missed an opportunity to flaunt his influence, even when it was disguised as family advice. However, during the dinner, it became clear to Patrick that Amelia was uneasy. She wasn't interested in talking about business. Her mind was elsewhere, and her usually confident demeanor now showed hints of doubt and anger. When they finished the meal, Amelia finally mustered the courage to speak, without any pretense. "Uncle Patrick, I've recently discovered something. Something about Oliver." Patrick, who had just lifted a glass of wine to his lips, froze mid-motion and looked at her with a rigid expression. "Oliver?" he repeated, as if the name of his lost nephew were an echo from a distant past. "Amelia, you know that talking about this has never brought us any answers. Your father spent years investigating and we never found anything." "That's not true," Amelia replied, her voice cold but trembling. "I know there's more to this story. I know my father suspected someone close to the family, and I know Richard was involved. But what you didn't tell me, Uncle, is that you knew more than you let on." Patrick frowned, clearly uncomfortable. "What are you talking about, Amelia?" "Richard disappeared shortly after the kidnapping. He was the only suspect your father mentioned, but there was never any proof. I've spoken to Oliver, Uncle Patrick." Amelia dropped the words like a bomb. "He's alive. He's come back. And now I want to know why you all kept him hidden for all these years." Patrick was paralyzed. His face turned pale, and for a moment he seemed unable to process what Amelia had said. The revelation that Oliver was alive hit him like a ton of bricks. He blinked a few times, trying to find the right words, but he couldn't hide the guilt in his eyes. "Oliver is alive?" he finally murmured, his voice shaky. I didn't know." Amelia didn't believe him. She could see the discomfort and confusion in Patrick, but she also noticed that he wasn't entirely surprised. He knew more than he was willing to admit. "You knew," Amelia insisted, leaning across the table. "Maybe you didn't know all the details, but you always knew something was wrong. My father suspected Richard, but who knows how deep this conspiracy goes. I'm not willing to accept half-truths anymore." Patrick shook his head, trying to regain his composure. "Amelia, I swear, if I had known Oliver was alive, I would have done anything to bring him back. But after Richard disappeared, all the leads vanished too. Your father did the best he could. It was devastating for him, for all of us." Patrick's words didn't completely convince Amelia. Although he didn't seem to be the mastermind behind the kidnapping, there was something he was still hiding. But perhaps he was just another pawn in a much larger puzzle. Amelia felt the weight of the truth pressing down on her, knowing she was close to uncovering darker secrets. The next day, Amelia returned home, where Oliver was waiting. She told him about the dinner with Patrick, but also expressed her frustration. There were still so many unanswered questions, and while Patrick had clearly been affected, he didn't seem to be the main culprit. "I get the feeling that someone, besides Richard, was involved, Amelia said to Oliver as she paced back and forth in the mansion study. Someone who's still around. But who? Oliver, who had listened to the story in silence, took a deep breath. Whoever it was, Amelia, we're still alive. And that's what matters now. We can't change what happened, but we can rebuild. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive everything our family did or didn't do, but I want to try. I want to start fresh, and that depends on us. Amelia stopped pacing and looked at her brother. She saw the pain in his eyes, pain he had carried since childhood, and realized how much she had neglected the emotions of those around her, including her own. She had always been so focused on protecting the family legacy that she had forgotten the most important thing, the people. Oliver was offering her a chance at redemption, and she knew she had to take it. Slowly, she walked over to Oliver and, for the first time in many years, allowed herself to show vulnerability. The tears she had long held back started to fall. She allowed herself to feel the pain, the grief, and the regret. I'm so sorry, Oliver, Amelia whispered, hugging her brother for the first time in a decade. I'm sorry for everything. The emotional reunion was a crucial step in Amelia's journey. She knew there was still much to uncover and confront, but in that moment, she was finally beginning to heal the wounds of the past. Amelia had faced her arrogance, her ego, and her coldness, and now for the first time, she was opening herself up to the possibility of redemption. But she knew the road ahead would be long, especially when it came to repairing the relationships she had damaged, starting with the brother she had despised for so long. Oliver was ready to forgive, but the two of them would have to work together to rebuild what had been lost. This new phase wasn't just about power or control, it was about family, love, and above all, reconciliation. The days following the emotional reunion of Amelia and Oliver were filled with deep reflection and change. For the first time in her life, Amelia was willing to let go of her arrogance and the facade of total control she had maintained for so many years. She finally began to realize that there was something far more valuable than business or power: human connections. The loss of Oliver, which had shaped much of her coldness, now also became the opportunity for her redemption. Amelia knew that repairing years of emotional distance wouldn't happen quickly. Oliver, even though he was willing to forgive her, still carried the weight of a past that couldn't be erased. However, the fact that they were together again was a monumental step, and both knew they would need to embark on a long and painful journey to rebuild what had been destroyed. In the following days, Amelia made the decision to reveal the truth to the closest staff members and longtime friends of the family. She knew she couldn't keep Oliver's identity hidden forever, and more than that, she wanted everyone to know the truth. The announcement came as a monumental surprise to everyone at the Cooper mansion. The driver, whom many believed to be just a simple employee, was, in fact, the rightful heir, lost for decades. Despite the shock, many showed relief and joy to see Oliver return. Others, however, seemed cautious, particularly those who had directly benefited from Oliver's absence in the line of succession. Without a doubt, there was a sense of discomfort, knowing that the return of the true heir would shake up the dynamics of power within the family. But Amelia was determined to face any resistance. For the first time, she no longer felt alone in managing the family empire. Oliver, now revealed, could take on the role that had always been his by right. And, unlike before, Amelia was willing to share that responsibility with him. A week later, Amelia and Oliver decided to confront the final piece of the puzzle: the lingering memories of the past and those involved in the kidnapping. As they delved deeper into more files and spoke with former employees, Amelia and Oliver came to the conclusion that although Richard had been the mastermind behind the kidnapping, he hadn't acted alone. One particular name kept surfacing in the investigations: Charles, an old business associate of their father, who had disappeared shortly after the incident. Charles had been close to the family but was also someone whose greed had raised suspicions in the past. As they dug deeper, they discovered that he had moved to another country shortly after the kidnapping and had not kept in contact with anyone since. Charles's absence from the family's social circle had conveniently gone unnoticed, like so many other secrets, but now the pieces were starting to fit together. Determined to close this chapter, Amelia hired a private investigative team to locate Charles. Weeks passed, and they finally managed to track him down in a Central American country, living under a new identity. The news gave Amelia and Oliver a sense that the cycle of secrets and betrayals was about to close. They knew that, although bringing Charles to justice was important, what mattered most was what they would do with their lives from that point on. Oliver especially was ready to leave the past behind. He had spent years living in the shadow of what had happened, and now, more than revenge, he sought peace. Amelia also felt that solving this mystery was more symbolic than practical. It no longer mattered to punish Charles or Richard. What really mattered was the challenge of starting their lives over and rebuilding their relationship as siblings. That same night, after receiving confirmation that Charles had been located, Amelia and Oliver sat together on the mansion's terrace, contemplating the future. The house, which for so long had been a symbol of power, now represented something different. For both of them, that immense space full of history now seemed more human, more intimate. Sitting side by side, they both felt something they hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Amelia broke the silence. I thought that finding out who was behind everything would bring me some kind of relief, but that's not what I feel, she confessed. I spent my entire life thinking control would make me feel safe, but I've realized what I was truly missing can't be bought or conquered. Oliver nodded, gazing at the vastness of the mansion's gardens. I know what you mean. I spent years searching for answers about who I was and why all this happened to me. But in the end, it wasn't the answers that brought me closure. It was the fact that we found each other again. Maybe what we need now isn't revenge or control, but the chance to start fresh. Amelia turned to him, her eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry for everything, Oliver. For the time we lost. For how I treated you when you were here, even though I didn't know who you really were. Oliver placed his hand over hers in a simple but meaningful gesture. You didn't know, Amelia. And what matters now is that we're here. We can start over, and we don't have to follow the same paths our parents did. The two sat in silence for a few more minutes, letting the weight of their words settle. Amelia knew that the future would be different from what she had once imagined for herself. She had spent so many years trying to build an empire, surrounded by mistrust and coldness. But now she saw that what truly mattered was right in front of her, her brother, her family, and the chance to right the wrongs of the past. In the months that followed, the changes began to take shape. Amelia and Oliver started working together, restructuring the family business, but with a new focus. More than just maximizing profits and expanding the Cooper family's power, the two decided that the new phase of the family empire would be marked by social responsibility and initiatives that genuinely benefited people. Amelia, who once cared only about numbers and status, now focused on the impact her company had on the world. The transformation in her personal life reflected in the way she managed the business. Oliver, on the other hand, found his place in the company, though not as the direct heir many had expected. He chose a more discreet approach, focusing on social and humanitarian projects, using the family's resources to make a difference in a more personal way. For both of them, the future was no longer about accumulating wealth or maintaining a facade of power. It was about reconnecting, finding purpose, and above all, healing the wounds of the past. A year after their reunion, Amelia and Oliver found themselves on the terrace of the mansion once again. This time, the atmosphere was different. The tension and pain that had marked so many of their previous conversations were gone. There was only serenity. Amelia looked at her brother and smiled. We did it, Oliver, she said, with a lightness she hadn't felt in a long time. We finally did it. Oliver smiled back. Yes, we did. And this is just the beginning. In that moment, they both knew that, although the past could never be completely erased, they had gained something far greater. A new chance to build a future together, as siblings. So guys, did you like this story full of twists and turns? If you've stayed this far, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. This helps us a lot to continue bringing exciting stories to you. We are very close to reaching the goal of 20,000 subscribers, and with your help, we can get there quickly. And don't stop here. Also check out other videos on the channel that are full of drama, suspense, and surprises. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.